This is a 7-Eleven in Japan, and there's a sign that says things to buy in Japan, obviously for tourists: matcha chocolate, matcha almonds, even matcha Haribo gummies.
Matcha has exploded over the last decade. Between 2019 and 2024, the global matcha market grew from $2.5 billion to $4.3 billion, and it's expected to reach $6.7 billion by 2029. But what happens when demand passes supply? A matcha shortage.
Let's say New York or Singapore or maybe Dubai or some of these popular places, you try to buy matcha even at a cafe, it's going to be really, really expensive. And on top of that, maybe recently in the news, some tariffs and taxes are changing.
A tea farm and a tea tour company here in Japan is feeling the demand surge, so much so to the point where they're limiting the tourists who have come all the way here to just buying one per person.
With some people now even stockpiling matcha, treating it like a hedge, just like wine or coffee beans.
We want everyone to be able to get a little bit of matcha, but we can't have one person getting so much of it because we're just not able to keep up with that demand.
Cafes dedicated to matcha have been popping up around Japan, mostly geared at tourists, but obviously Japanese people as well, and that has also helped contribute to this global movement. So it's not just drinks they're selling, it's not just matcha drinks. They're now selling lemonade, they're selling cookies, they're selling smoothies. So you can start to see how this demand is really going crazy.
But why? Matcha is a finely ground powder made from specially grown green tea leaves. Unlike regular green tea where you steep the leaves and throw them out, with matcha you're consuming the entire leaf, and with it, a massive dose of antioxidants, amino acids, and caffeine. It gives you the energy without the crash, boosts metabolism, calms the mind, and looks great on social media. Celebs and social media are making it insanely popular, and it's become not just a drink, but a lifestyle brand.
So what will happen next?
Unlike regular tea, not all matcha is created equal. Authentic matcha comes from Japan, especially from regions including Uji, Nishio, and Shizuoka, where the climate, soil, and centuries-old techniques create a unique product. High-quality matcha is made from shade-grown leaves, has a vivid green color, is stone ground into ultra-fine powder, and tastes sweet, not bitter, with a certain creamy umami finish. But here's the kicker. This process is labor-intensive and slow. Shade growing requires specialized equipment and weeks of preparation. Only the youngest, most tender leaves are usually picked by hand, and it can take an hour to grind just 30 grams of matcha, maybe enough for 20 cups.
Some of the tea farmer friends have mentioned that the orders are growing and there's too many orders for the amount of matcha that can be produced.
The result? There's no way to mass produce real matcha quickly, and demand is now far outpacing the supply. I've come on a tea tour here in rural Japan. So the average tea farmer in Japan is 66 years old, and fewer young people are taking over the family farms. Skilled labor is disappearing, and without hands to harvest, production bottlenecks are becoming chronic. This farm is now relying on people from abroad to come for internships.
My name is Emily. I am from the US in New Jersey on the East Coast, and I came to Japan, Wazuka, to intern at Obubu Tea Farms, and I wanted to intern here because I have an interest in Japanese tea culture as well as a huge addiction to matcha.
So Japan is such a mountainous country. I'm standing here in the middle of the mountain, and you can see that everywhere there's a couple feet of land that you can actually harvest tea on. They're using it, I mean, everywhere. Even areas that are super sloped, still they found a way to grow tea here. So you can imagine it's a lot of work, it's expensive, and now try doing all of this in a region that is extremely mountainous, and then you can start to see how such a big rise in demand could lead to a shortage. I'm told that this all here is being harvested to become matcha, and they're actually protecting it from the sun to ultimately limit its caffeine levels. So it might look like there are so many leaves here and that can create a lot of tea, but actually after the process of going through what it needs to go through, you end up with very little actual amounts of tea ready for consumption. So after it goes through the drying process and all that, so it really takes a lot of land to cultivate tea. Now we're in an interesting region where most of the tea in Japan is actually for the Japanese market. I think only 5 or 10% goes abroad, but as the demand rises, especially for matcha, we're starting to see that shift. And some of these fields are switching from sencha to matcha because of this high demand. So I can tell you right now that this is gonna turn into matcha. I can say that confidently because it's shaded. Another thing that's interesting here is per Japan regulation, in order to call it matcha, you need to shade the leaves for some period of time. Now, this farm that I'm at shades it for several weeks, but legally, technically, you could shade it for as little as 1 day, but that would be considered not as high quality or not as premium or not as authentic to how matcha is supposed to turn out.
The matcha shortage is real, and it's being driven by a perfect storm. So first you have exploding global demand. US imports of Japanese matcha tripled between 2017 and 2023. In 2022 alone, matcha exports from Japan hit a record high of over $32 million, with 56% going to the US. Then there's climate change. In 2023, Kyoto and Shizuoka experienced abnormal weather, intense heat, irregular rainfall, and even early blooming, which damaged tea plants and reduced yields. A single late frost can wipe out 20 to 30% of a crop. There's also limited areas here. Japan's geography is limited. Only about 5% of its land is suitable for tea farming, and expanding matcha production is difficult without compromising on quality. All this has led to higher prices, limited availability, and some brands quietly switching to lower grade Chinese matcha or blending it to stretch supplies at the cost of taste and health benefits.
So Japanese people are also eating, matcha ice cream and cakes and cookies. So I think they don't think it's so crazy that people are having matcha, because it's also popular in Japan as maybe a food item in foods and stuff like that.
Wholesale prices of ceremonial grade matcha have risen by 25 to 35% in the past 2 years. Some premium suppliers now charge $80 to $100 per 100 grams. Retail brands are getting squeezed. Chacha Matcha, a trendy New York City chain, raised prices twice in 2024. Matcha Bar, which supplies matcha to Whole Foods, noted a 20% increase in raw material costs. And while Starbucks hasn't particularly raised prices of matcha, supply constraints are already leading to out-of-stock issues in certain regions. For businesses, this creates a pricing dilemma. Raise prices and risk alienating your budget-conscious customers, or absorb the costs and reduce your margins. Either way, the golden green powder is getting more expensive. The matcha craze has launched hundreds of startups, from direct-to-consumer brands like Tenzo Tea to mega retailers like Trader Joe's. Everyone wants a slice of this pie. Matcha products often have great margins, so a ceremonial-grade matcha tin costs maybe $15 in wholesale but can sell for over $40 in retail. And a matcha latte can cost under $1 to make, yet sell for $5 to $8. Then there's supplements, skincare, chocolates, and protein powders with matcha that sell for a premium, even if the matcha inside is minimal. But with the current shortage, businesses face new challenges: product delays, brand reputation risk, and even marketing complications. You can't push premium Japanese matcha if you're a Chinese substitute.
I always knew there was going to be a huge demand. I think I might have jumped a little late on the trend, but unfortunately, yeah, there is that matcha shortage, so it does worry me if I do start my own matcha brand.
The brands that win in this environment will be the ones who own part of the supply chain, build strong relationships with Japanese growers who are literally deciding who to sell to. To meet demand, many companies are turning to Chinese-grown matcha, which is now accounting for a bigger portion of global supply.
So let's say you have sencha, and instead the market says, hey, we want more matcha, then the farmer can transition to making matcha rather than sencha. And that's absolutely happening. So you'll see more matcha factories, because there's a special kind of factory necessary to produce matcha. There's more of those. And then also the farmers will say there's a lot of demand coming overseas.
China is ramping up production rapidly. So in 2023, it produced over 10,000 metric tons of matcha compared to Japan's 4,000 metric tons. But Chinese matcha isn't always up to par. It's grown in different climates and soil. It's often not shade grown as long as it is in Japan. You have lower L-theanine levels on average, and it can even contain more contaminants or pesticides. Now, to be fair, there is high-quality Chinese matcha out there, but it lacks the prestige and century-old tradition of Japanese matcha. And for consumers who care about authenticity, this creates confusion. And for brands, it's a transparency nightmare. Label it matcha and no one knows the difference.
And it's going to be very difficult even for those cafes, for the consumer, and then tea farmers as well. They can't produce enough, right? Because the land is limited, even if they're transitioning their fields. And then let's say this is a boom and then a crash, then there's going to be some trouble for the farmers, or they'll have to transition to other kinds of tea usually.
Believe it or not, the matcha shortage has actually created an underground reselling economy. In Japan, even certain ceremonial grade matcha is being reserved for domestic use, leaving international buyers scrambling for the leftovers. Supply chain disruptions are now a core part of the business planning. Now, there's no easy fix here, but a few things are happening. Japan's government is issuing grants to help young farmers enter tea farming. Vertical farming and controlled environment agriculture are being tested to grow matcha indoors, but it's quite expensive. Some brands are experimenting with even US matcha farming, like in Hawaii or California, but it will be years before that is viable at scale. In the short term, expect higher matcha prices, more transparency wars with people asking, where is your matcha really from? And also a flood of matcha adjacent products that don't contain real matcha but borrow the branding.
A lot of farms, now that they can't rely on the matcha factory they go to, so they're going to try to making the process a little bit more mechanized. They'll try to, I believe that we have a spring blend matcha. I think that takes less time than those stone grinding matchas. We are trying to adapt to it. This matcha boom is huge.
Yeah, it's not a sustainable thing that, maybe several years ago it was like organic boom, and then maybe gluten-free boom, and there's always some kind of boom, and maybe there's a peak and a valley. So my guess is the boom will go up and the prices are going up, and people maybe potentially won't always be into matcha, and it's going to come down.